There are moments in military history when the battlefield is not of mud and smoke, but of conscience. When the clash is not between armies, but between obedience and honor. In the winter of 1943, amid the bitter cold of a remote frontier outpost, such a moment was born. The 17th Company of the Eastern Command had been stationed along a border that never truly slept, a place where fear was constant and cruelty had become routine. The men obeyed orders not because they believed in them, but because they feared what came from defiance.
Their captain, Markov, was a man of authority turned arrogance, sharp in tongue, ruthless in punishment. He believed discipline was born from humiliation and respect came only from fear. Under his command, men trembled, except a quiet, measured soldier. His boots were always clean, his rifle always perfect. He never shouted, never smiled, but his eyes carried the calm certainty of a man who knew right from wrong.
When Markov ordered his platoon to execute a group of unarmed prisoners, civilians accused of helping the enemy, the silence that followed was heavier than the frost.
Koren stepped forward, his voice steady. "Captain, they are not combatants." Markov's jaw tensed. His authority had been challenged, not by a rebel, but by a soldier whose very calmness felt like defiance. "Then you will obey," the captain growled, "or you will join them." And in that instant, the line between command and conscience snapped.
The wind howled through the courtyard as the men formed a line, rifles trembling in the cold. Markov's voice cut through the air. "Fire!" But the shots never came. Koren stepped out of line, slow, deliberate. His boots crunched over the ice as he approached the captain. "Enough," he said quietly. Markov drew his sidearm and pressed it against Koren's chest. The world froze. A single heartbeat. Then a sharp crack. The pistol flew from Markov's hand, struck by Koren's lightning-fast movement, a single, precise motion that disarmed him before anyone could blink. The sound echoed across the post like thunder in a tomb. Markov stumbled back, stunned, his authority shattered not by rebellion, but by mastery. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The courtyard remained frozen in disbelief. Soldiers who had once flinched at Markov's shadow now stood as if awakening from a long nightmare. Koren lowered his hand, calm, disciplined, untouched by rage. He looked at the captain, whose eyes were wide with a kind of fear he had never known. "Authority," Koren said quietly, "is meant to protect, not to destroy." The captain said nothing. His mouth opened, then closed. The words would not come. His power had depended on fear, and in a single instant the illusion was gone. Moments later, the battalion's major arrived, drawn by the echo of the shot. He looked at the stunned soldiers, the scattered pistol, and the captain trembling before his sergeant. "What happened here?" the major demanded. Markov tried to speak, but his voice broke into fragments. Koren simply saluted. "Sir, I refused an unlawful order." The major studied him, and for the first time, a faint, almost imperceptible nod. "Then you acted as a soldier should." He turned to the others. "This post will remember what discipline truly means." Markov was relieved of command that same day. He left without a word, his proud boots sinking into the snow, leaving shallow prints behind. The prisoners were released.
The men of the 17th returned to duty. But something fundamental had changed. They obeyed orders, not out of fear, but respect. And in the evenings, when the cold winds swept through the barracks, someone would whisper, "He stopped the captain's gun with his bare hand." The moral spread faster than any rumor. True strength is silent, but it never bows to cruelty. Years passed. The war ended. Lines were redrawn, medals awarded, memories buried beneath the dust of time. But in that remote outpost, the story of Sergeant Corin endured, not in books or reports, but in the way soldiers treated one another. Recruits learned it first as a rumor, then as a ritual. When an officer entered, they would rise, not out of fear, but out of respect for the uniform, the duty, and the dignity behind it. Corin himself never sought recognition. He returned home, quiet as he had always been, working in silence, tending a small farm by the forest. When once asked by a young officer if he regretted disobeying a superior, Corin smiled faintly. "Obedience," he said, "means nothing without conscience. A soldier's loyalty is sacred, but not to cruelty." Those words became part of the training manuals years later, cited as the Corin Doctrine, a lesson on moral command. And among veterans, his name became a quiet salute to integrity, a man who had reminded the uniform of its purpose. He refused cruelty and restored honor. That was how the legend was told. And as long as soldiers march under any flag, the echo of that frozen courtyard will remain, a reminder that the greatest victories are not won on battlefields, but within the soul.